Excellent. So thanks for being here, Margot. I'm very, very spoiled to have this conversation with you today. This conversation is part of the Sounds Like Sustainability series, and it is co-organised by the UQ Centre for Communication and Social Change in Australia and the International Environmental Communication Association, the IECA. And I will just briefly put some more information in the chat on both organisations, and I'm very happy to get everyone who's interested to get connected with the IECA or the Centre for Communication and Social Change. So, but it's not about the centres, it's not about Sounds Like Sustainability, it's about you and your wonderful work, and we will talk about sustainability and art. And my first question in this series of webinars is always, where are you at the moment? What can you hear at the moment? And is there anything that you can hear or any sound that you would relate to sustainability? In what kind of dimension?
Well, we live in a arboretum that is very urban. We're right next to the city of Chicago. So this time of year, the birds are nearly tropical. You think you're in some kind of equator kind of place, but they're all different kinds of birds because we're on the major flyway. So to hear the birds is so invigorating and connects me with nature right away. And I love kind of waking up early and hearing just the one bird and then several more, and that really charges my batteries in the spring.
That's awesome. Would you like to talk a bit more about yourself and yourself in this environment and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I live in this house where Dan and I raised 3 children. I have a studio in the backyard, and I'm also a writer. So all of my work is propelled by environmental statements. It's pretty much, if we could make every decision on Earth based on life on Earth, in every way, shape, and form, think about people and how they could live a better quality of life. And so that is what I write, and that is what I sculpt. A lot I focus on an individual who has done remarkable things, but I've also done an entire exhibit of unsung heroes, and continue to focus on human life being primary, but in relation with our interrelationship with plant, animal. And sometimes my symbols are human, plant, and animal together, where I have pieces at the Botanic Garden that are like that, where it looks like a duck rising out of the lake. It looks like, speaking of, my dog has just come to say hello. It looks like a lily, and it looks like a cloaked person. So I really feel that we are all made of carbon, and we are all interconnected and thriving when we recognize our connection.
That is very, very beautiful. And I would love to talk more about how art recreates the human-nature relationship. Before that, I would love to just bring in this term of sustainability, because I know that it is highly debated and sometimes used and abused by organizations in their communication, and we all know that it brings in a bit of morality to our individual action, because we feel like, oh, now I'm really sustainable here, and oh, I've done really bad there. I would be interested in your definition of sustainability and where you see that it's maybe coming around with a bit of a downside.
Well, sustainable is maintaining the earth as a place to live. And we are in an Anthropocene extinction event. We are losing animals all the time while we have an explosion of human population, to where we are not changing our behavior with more people, even consuming oxygen and exhuming carbon, we have to change our behavior that we're not doing that in other ways and means. And that there's still a discussion about it is so aggravating, that we cannot sustain life on Earth almost now with the flooding that is happening, with the heat. People are dying of heat stroke. We're dying of severe weather. This is not really sustainable, what we've got, and that we're still discussing, is this happening or is this not? Or should this be happening anyway? No, it's Anthropocene. It is human caused. It's across the board, and we've known about it since, we've actually known about it since the 1800s, but really about 79, 80. It was world renowned when the Jasons started to publish their carbon findings. And with the warning, if this isn't checked, the glaciers might melt. And if the glaciers melt, there will be exponential change. And we are watching that happen now.
Where do you feel that sustainability is communicated? Like, where's this message that you just talked about? Where can you see this message? Who's talking about it predominantly? And what are the channels that this is talked about?
I think there are definitely magazines, but sometimes that gets to be preaching to the choir. I happen to be someone who isn't, the choir that reads as much as I can about it. Conferences are the same, where we're preaching to the choir. So we have to reach out and get the statement out there and to people in their neighborhoods in a daily way of life. Billboards would be great, as you're driving by. But I also was able to carve tree trunks. We have 55 of them carved throughout 30 miles of Chicago parks right now. People pass by the tree trunks. They miss the tree and the canopy that was there. And yet artists have come in to give the trees a fifth season. They are now a piece of art, and there's bonding to them as a kind of totem and symbol of the neighborhood. But those are right along busy highways. And if I get to speak on the radio, I'll say, this is to remind you to take your foot off the gas pedal. And if you want to do that just to slow down, that helps. But we do need to reduce carbon. And the reason this tree is dead is because of carbon, too much carbon in the air. So if we can remind people on a daily basis, you miss this canopy. What if we just took the dead tree trunks away? Everyone would forget it within a week, but having it there recreated as artwork keeps the reminder.
Excellent. I love this project, and to talk about art as a reminder, as a signpost, as a communication channel that especially we as communication researchers and scholars and maybe strategists, we don't really talk about it that much. We focus on the media, we focus on mass media, we explore new social media to communicate about that. But my feeling is that art is very underestimated, not only as a channel to get a message across, but art can do more. What is the potential beside being a channel to kind of give a certain message, but what else can artwork do, thinking about it more broadly at this time?
Well, I think that the art is an emotional communication. We don't get caught up in the words. As soon as somebody says global warming, it's like, oh, wasn't that the 70s? Climate change, wasn't that the 90s? It's like any word you put on it is old hat in a certain way. But to see something that's beautiful, made of nature, about the vibrancy of nature, that goes straight to a communication that's emotional. And with that, there can be backup of an explanation why this is important, why we need to take care of this aspect of our ecological system. And art can do that in a very direct way.
That is awesome. If we like there are very different kinds of art. So there are things that are embedded in the nature and our environment, like the tree trunk project. Then there are like really more irritating art pieces that are more interactive. And then of course there's art that speaks to you and that brings along many more messages and kind of a manifold of feelings, emotions, like canvas paintings, for example. And you are doing beautiful artworks. Maybe you want to share one, or maybe you want to talk a bit about your coral paintings, and talk a bit about what is the background here and what is the idea. Is it more a representation of nature, or does it really create this message, or this feeling and idea, or recreates our ecological or eco-cultural identity, so to speak?
I like the eco-cultural, because with art, these artworks will be shown in galleries and museums. So we're stepping into a culture of wealth in a certain way. And with that, we are communicating directly about, this is a beautiful, beautiful thing in the world that you may never see, but you need to know it needs to be taken care of. And the one thing that it needs is to have less carbon so that it can thrive. So that is a socio kind of economic entree versus the tree project, which is in almost every neighborhood in Chicago. And we've tried to spread them out as much as possible. And those reach people on an everyday level. So, and I will say the Chicago Tribune has called it a outdoor museum, because the sculptures are incredible, what people have done in trees. And the artists come in from Boston and New York, and we have one from Germany who really want to say something ecological. And here is a canvas that's really unusual. And so they come in with a message. One is a giant lemon on top of the tree, and it's like, you get it in a funny way, and you get it in a way that really means something, that we are creating lemons here. And this tree is dead now, and so we are planting hundreds of thousands, millions of trees, 22 million trees in the next upcoming decades. But it's take a while for those to be a full canopy. And we're also taking care of the young trees, the saplings, with annual Earth Day sapling care. I call it ASAP with the exclamation point, Adopt a Sapling Project. And we try to take care of saplings that are in especially underserved neighborhoods in Chicago, South Side, for the most part.
Awesome. I know that you are thinking a lot beyond art into the space of behavioral change. And we were briefly chatting at the beginning of a wonderful, another project, which is really about changing people's habits, which is more grassrooty. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so during COVID, I joined my alumni Yale Blue Green Sustainability Group, and we have grand plans for really capturing carbon in the air and this and that. But we knew that these plans would take years to actualize, and so I thought, let's do a grassroots communication amongst people and what they have done and learned, and what kind of habits they changed during COVID to reach the Paris Agreement goals. Individually, we have to change this. I am a big believer in this. We have to go back to grassroots and get people to change and support people. It is easier to change if you have a group. So we're building groups in this alumni organization in different cities. And this is called Green Blocks Initiative. And the concept is that every city is a block. And as we build our blocks out with our projects and having events and meeting people and building our community, the blocks between the cities will come together, and we will have a network that's nationwide of blocks. So right now it is, I can put it up on the chat for you. there's a link to visit it. It's at yellbluegreen.org, and it is Green Bloc's initiative. So it's a series of subjects like health, energy, food, kind of gardening. And so we did a survey, and we had the larger group decide what they'd be interested in reading and contributing to. Now we're building each one of those subject matters with individual articles. And the articles are webinars, they're movies, they're written. If they're a movie, we have a written element to it. If they're written, we have a movie element to it. So we're reaching different ways of accessing people. And the whole idea is to bring people together, let them know there's a community and that they can change faster than if they're on their own.
This is beautiful, because from a communication perspective, I'm thinking a lot about how and where can we create conversational spaces. And I think about this a lot in relation to art, because art might stimulate thinking, might be a disruption, create like those cracks in patterns of thinking, especially if it's a trunk that carries a lemon on top. But my question, again, as a communication person, is, okay, how can we then catch those thoughts that come up, catch those kind of associations? Like, how can we embed them in kind of continuing conversation? Is something like that happening in this project? Like, how are those conversations facilitated, and how are they kind of connected to each other to a broader discourse?
I am glad you brought that up, because I, of course, dove into it of this is the best way to get across carbon and using carbon. And yet I found that all the artists didn't think the same way. They said, oh, here's a lot of material I can sculpt with. And they weren't necessarily making an environmental statement. But as time went on, and usually it was, Margot, why don't you go talk about your carbon thing with this, radio program? And it was called the Carbon Thing. I'm like, yeah, okay, I will. But so for me, it was a great opportunity. What happened was it emerged into being an environmental, it evolved into being an environmental project, and it attracted environmental artists. And that's where we got the national statements. Now, we had kind of hoped it would go national, where other places would carve their spruce or their palm trees, or, make art with those. And instead, national and international people came to us. There is one more tree project that's, I believe it's in Kentucky. There was one in Indiana. So it did expand. And there's one right now that I'm involved with in Massachusetts. So we are getting out there. And for these, you have to, plan on a week that you could make it and go and carve your tree or whatever. But in Massachusetts, they're going to take my addition to the tree and put it in for me. So I will ship it to them. So that's another way to work it out, where it is saving on transportation costs and materials and all of that, to just ship the piece there. And that's what we did with the lemon as well. We were able to put that up for the artist.
Excellent. Like, you're talking about transportation and kind of the combination of, like, here's this message, like, we really have to reduce carbon, and by the same time we are dependent on certain kind of things in our everyday life that apparently create carbon, and where our footprint isn't that excellent. And I would like to share with everyone a sound as well. So I'm not talking about birds, which are just amazing in Australia.
Oh my gosh, my daughter and I and my son bird watched in Australia. We were so blown away. They became avid bird watchers with me there.
And
it's
amazing how much you get used to it, because when I talk to people on the phone in the morning or at night, then they go like, oh my God, listen at the birds. And I'm like, oh, really? I kind of, you get used to it. So here's my.
And we go months without them. So when they
Oh,
come back in the spring and we get birds that fly through Chicago, it's spectacular.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. So here comes my sound. It's a bit of a like. It's a bit of a weird song, and I just wanted to use it as an example. It's the sound of a marker
Ah,
on a piece of paper. And why I really wanted to bring it up is that we have thousands of these markers in the house. They always fly around open, they dry out. I go mad because my boys, like, they do a lot of drawings, which I love. They do a lot of stuff with colors and everything, but it's like everywhere, and it dries out and I have to put them away. It comes along with a lot of plastic. I always have to buy new ones, and I really go mad about it. Why I'm telling this story is I want to have a very brief conversation about how all this climate crisis related communication and sustainability messaging creates a lot of dissonances in people, because they feel like, well, I'm trying to do my best, but then, like, how to deal with a conference that I really want to go is in Washington, D.C. I have to fly straight from Australia to give this lecture on sustainability, which is super dissonant. So
right.
how can people, like, what is the way out of these dissonances that we are trapped in on an everyday basis, when we go shopping, when we do drawings, when we kind of look around in the rooms we're in at the moment, like everyone who's in the room can do the same, and you look around, you feel like, oh, I'm really trying to be good, but I can't, here and there, and these conflicts that arise that people usually do not really like. How to deal with that from your perspective?
So I had it's called Ever Scholar, and we read books and then we get together and discuss them for a week in a seminar. And it was going to be in New York City last August. And I was concerned about COVID and flying and, and I wanted flexibility. So I just did a road trip with my electric car. And I looked at, and what I decided to do along the way was to just get it out on social media. So we have a solar array, and I started with the first charge was the solar array, and I made it there and back for about $200. That's, a 12-hour drive. And there was, the breaks were to go for a walk while it was charging or have a meal or something like that. And so anyway, I got so much attention with that on social media. People were like, yes, and how far did you go? And I wondered if this was possible. And I said, there are so many chargers. It's just at what time, at what point, do you want to go slow and not pay for it, or do a supercharge and pay a little bit? And even then, it's an immense savings. And I was guilt-free. There was no emissions during that whole trip versus what would happen with an airplane or even a train. I mean, a lot of people who have signed off on airplanes, even trains have a lot of emissions. So that was one solution. And I was just I was invited to a book award in North Dakota. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I haven't been there. How far is it? I'm Googling it. It's like 12 hours with the charging. It'll be 15 to show up for a dinner. I'm not sure, but I didn't want to consider flying. Trains, I think, would be secondary, but I think now with an electric car, that's the way to go. And I do a lot of things now that I wouldn't do before I had the electric car. Mm-hmm. I do a painting with friends kind of workshop that's 30 miles away. And I love to see them. And now the car allows that guilt-free. Whereas before I would have really weighed driving that far for it. So those are really considerations. I mean, I don't even throw away plastic. I have a whole cupboard of these clamshells for carry-out food. And Dan is just like, why are you saving all those? I'm like, because I can't throw them away. There's the percentage of what is recycled, even when we have a good recycling program, is so low. So sure enough, during COVID, we had lots of those. Bags and bags of them. And I gave a workshop at a community garden with kids who hadn't, were just learning how to grow their own. And we turned all of those into little greenhouses for them. So they all planted their seeds, and that was one way to reuse them. And so every single thing I weigh, and it means I live with a lot of clutter, but we just did a plastics campaign on social media where we would have little Canva ads that just said, I used my own cup at Starbucks and I got coffee for 50 cents, versus $2.50 for a paper cup that you're going to throw away. And this is where I go to refill my pump bottles, so that I have the plastic pump bottle, but I could use this for years. And we have a co-op in town where we can refill them. And there's now national programs for that. So I try and just balance everything out and try and make the best decision. And it does take a lot of time. It's hard to do.
Absolutely. So I want to just take two things from there and kind of head in towards the end of this beautiful conversation. So the first thing is that apparently what you did with this electric car example is exactly what I think is this public conversation about, can really make an issue out of something that other people would potentially not make an issue out of. This kind of offering the space of for conversations, involving other people in the conversation. And this is something that just happens while doing something. And by kind of leading by example, but really facilitating and being involved in the communication about it, or in the conversation about it. And all those tiny little chats like, oh, how can you do it? And then share it on social media. And then people go like, oh my God, like, where did you charge actually? And oh, I know this place that's so little. And all these kind of consequential communications that are happening. I would like to share a link to a Facebook group that is called I Sustain. And this Facebook group is exactly where I want to facilitate these individual experiences, as you just said with the coffee cup, like those very tiny little examples, and facilitate a room for sharing these little things. Like, I keep that, and this is what I did with that, and I feel okay with this, and other examples of like, oh, I feel really bad because I did that. And then kind of just keep the conversation going to cultivate a better understanding of sustainable behavior by just sharing examples. This isn't a question, this is a sharing aspect, but I do have one last question. My feeling is that going all the way with the e-car is somehow a bit revolutionary. And I'm wondering if we, especially kind of talking to you as an artist, if this is the potential of art in the sustainability space to really create these moments of disruption, to be a bit revolutionary, to tap into spaces where no one actually went, to do the extraordinary, to not only lead as an example, but much more to irritate people and to create this disruption that then makes people think. Would you agree on that? Do you have any experiences in this space? How?
Yes, I would totally agree. Without controversy, the subject doesn't get communicated, and we have to charge the conversation because it's been squelched so consistently. We have to make it so there isn't we have to make it so that at least they know what we're talking about, those that oppose. I'm not sure how it is in Australia. I think it's much more tuned in with nature, because nature is so strong in Australia. A tree could kill you, there's critters that you have to be wary of, we have things like that, but it's mostly a branch falling that could hurt you. It's not as dramatic as what's in Australia. So you have to be connected in Australia. You have to be aware. But we have to be, I try and make it extraordinarily good so that it is communicated with beauty. People recognize beauty, and there are so many disturbing images in art, and that I think if we could make it as nice as we can and as symbolic of the beauty of nature as we can, then we're making a strong statement. But I do think we have to get people to think, to think every day about the plastic they're throwing away, about what they're purchasing. We have one section of the Green Blocks that is on plastics. And we did a Zoom conversation, New York, Chicago, and Connecticut all contributed. So it was widespread with information that we had. And then right before Earth Day, we had 2 months where we did a plastics campaign and showed these little Canva ads to build up to Earth Day, so that by the time we've gotten to Earth Day, it's okay, we're ready now, and now we want to start another one for, whatever the next thing we will celebrate will be, leaves in the fall or something like that. And that's actually what our next meeting will be about. So I totally agree with you that we have got to get imagery out there, conversations out there, and make it steady. I think with my car trip being on Instagram, I think, and Facebook, 4 people have bought electric cars from it. That's pretty good. That's what I know. So it's one step at a time.
Cool. It's awesome.
Yeah. And one other thing was in the Super Bowl, I'm not saying they got the idea from me, but one of the ads was for an electric truck, and it was where I'm stopping on a road trip. And I'm like, oh, there's my idea.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So throw it out there, let it, share it. And the ripple effect will really get across.
Yeah. I love this message. There's a question in the that really needs to be asked. I would love to open up the discussion now for any questions from people in the room.
Hi, thank you. This was a great conversation. I'm so happy to hear that art can make ripples, because I'm personally very interested in using art as a medium to spread this message. So I had a question for Margot. I just wanted to know how you manage the urgency of situations with also being continuously inspired to do things. Like, I think eco-anxiety is a big thing as a researcher, as an artist. And yeah, how do you just go about dealing with that whole thing was my question.
Creativity helps. I will say, I knew COVID was an environmental issue. We have COVID because we live too close to animals. We have wild animals at, was it a market? I'm not exactly sure, but we don't separate the spaces. And was it from a bat or a monkey? It just keeps being discussed. But COVID was definitely environmental. And as it went on, my anxiety really built, not only by the huge behavioral change, but that's why we started Green Blocks, because it's like, look at how everybody on Earth has changed. And the coral is better for it. We can already see what that reduction of carbon is. If we can label and define how we've changed and keep it, then we've done something. And it really is to say we can change if we have to, and we will if we need to. And I think every marker is out there that we absolutely need to. Creativity really helps to deal with anxiety. I do wood carving, I paint, I write, I get up early, I go late, and it really is, in a way, it's like playing, but you're getting something across. So you're enjoying a process and you're expressing your concern. And I think that creativity is the way to go for having the message delivered to you too. Creativity helps.
Right. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I hope, create on
Yeah,
whatever form you take, or all forms. Yeah. I just picked all forms.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. That is beautiful. Are there any other questions? Right. This was a wonderful conversation, and I'm very happy to keep this conversation alive in various spaces and conversations, and we will definitely stay in touch and try to create something out of that. And I'm very, very grateful for you being here today and having this conversation.
Thank you. I'll join your Facebook group, and I've got a couple of really short videos that I think are, I use very little words, but the imagery comes across and it's like, oh, that's possible. And it might have, you know, I might have had to stretch to think.
So I think because then, like, looking at all these examples expands the normal, expands the individual understanding of, oh, okay, this is normal and this is a disruption. But the more you see that goes beyond these borders of your normality or your understanding of normality, the wider your own radius of action gets and your understanding.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for great questions.
Thank you so much. Lovely talking to you, and